You're listening to VerySpatial Podcast, episode 707, January 15th, 2023.
Hello and welcome to a VerySpatial Podcast. I'm Jesse.
I'm Sue.
I'm Barb.
And this is Frank.
And this week, we're going to be talking about some various newses, including there's some folks, they were doing some research. They published in Nature Neuroscience, and it's information that we as geographers have talked about on the podcast. We talk about it's the idea that our mental map starts fairly small, and as we progress through age, it expands. But they begin to talk a little bit more into the amount that it expands, and then look at it in terms of broader concepts such as neurodegenerative diseases. And so there's a lot there that we can kind of unpack from articles like this. What was something that kind of stood out to others?
I kind of think we start at an assumption in development that you develop and then you're developed and then that's what you are, right? I'm not saying when I say we, I don't mean researchers. I mean the general public. They kind of think I've developed math skill and now that's just it. And I think this reinforces the notion. The model they use is a funnel. So the idea that you start, with a tiny tippy bit when you're a baby, and as you move out in age, that worldview, that spatial understanding gets very broad very quickly, as opposed to like a cylinder or a narrow tape cylinder, so that it's you hit a point and it kind of stays static. And that, I think, is a very powerful insight for them to prove. I think that researchers have suspected this for quite some time, but to get it kind of proven that way, that, this thing is a very expanding funnel and it gets big quick, and it creates complications, but opportunities for understanding how we absorb and interact.
Because we don't stop, right? As long as we're alive, we're continuing to experience new places, new ideas about those locations. Everything from sensory input when we're in a place that we know to completely new places. So yeah, we're always kind of expanding those models.
Yeah, and one of the things that I found about that is the notion that that hyperbolic or that logarithmic expansion, right, is directly related to amount of time devoted to a given place. So the hope is to understand and apply then those models, right, a hyperbolic geometry and these types of models to understand more about changes in the brain. And that may eventually help, hopefully, with disorders that involve learning and memory and perhaps a loss of memory, that maybe if we understand how it's being made, that potentially we can understand ways to mitigate loss. So this is way down the line, but this is an interesting piece because our ability to comprehend space in three dimensions and navigate through it, right, is fundamental to what we are and who we are as humans.
Yeah. And I just want to point this out, that it just highlights the importance of Futuan for those geographers out there, because, he basically argued that, among others, but he was the big name, that places experience space. As we stay in a particular space and experience it more, we get more depth and meaning to it. And essentially this research showed the same thing, is that in this particular case, when I'm talking about rats, but when they move more slowly through an environment, they gain more information about the space. So it's just sort of highlighting this stuff that Futuan said 40, 50 years ago now.
And of course he had papers before the books. So it was probably 50 years ago. That is, he was publishing some of this in the AAG journals and such.
So British Telecom is partnering with a startup, Altitude Angel, to create drone corridors called Project Skyway across southern and central England. And the idea is that they'll carry cargo and other supplies. But related to what we've talked about in the past, they've created a network of towns and cities and the ability to identify what else is in that aircraft space. If you're wondering how is this going to work when you're talking about a drone corridor, along with other types of aircraft and things that you find. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this works as they roll it out.
And I think this is interesting, right? Because this is one of those questions that we have, with the new navigation technologies and delivery mechanisms and things like drones, but also, questions about things like driverless cars, right? Is that we have systems like air. So that's a good example with air traffic control, right? Even though technically the sky is open, aircraft actually in commercial use are following certain pathways. They don't just go wherever they want. They actually have pathways, and they're guided through the system of air traffic control. And this is really interesting. This is a cool article, Barb, that you're talking about, that, thinking, hey, if we're going to have drones in this space, we need something similar. And maybe the aircraft system isn't really the best way to do this. And so a supplement like this idea, I think could go a long way towards trying to find that little niche that works for both.
Well, the interesting bit here is they refer to it as a superhighway, right? And the analog to terrestrial movement is that roads have expectations and laws and regulations, and you're not going to be driving on the sidewalk, at least not legally, not for long. And we know the behaviors to be expected. So the nice thing about this is that within the drone superhighway, we know what this is going to look like, and allows people predictability for those who may be looking outside of that. I'm not going to go in there because these things happen and I'm not conforming to those norms, which is good.
When I read it, that regional approach made me think of the early development of the interstate highway system in many countries. That same organization of the movement as a whole, which would be very good for seeing everything in its entirety over, a whole year or many years.
Along with drones, we're also looking at satellites, and an interesting recent corporate type of discussion was that John Deere, the agribusiness, is looking at going into satellites.
Sorry. You mean John Deere, the software licensing business? As well.
They have, a very long history. Most of us in the U.S. and other countries even have seen the green tractors. And, if you say it's a green tractor, you know what company you're talking about. But it's one of those things, whenever we are talking about agribusinesses or software and hardware businesses, as Frank points out, we are getting to the point now, because of unmanned vehicles, both in the sky and on the ground, that it really is about the connections of what you're talking to in the sky or the data from the sky that you're getting. And so whether we're talking about, finding ways to supplement precision agriculture in terms of location, or being able to support it by providing in-depth guidance on how well your crops are doing in a certain area, there's lots of places where not just John Deere, but other companies can go into that can, take advantage of satellites to support their ground-based initiatives. So it's kind of an interesting shift, or expansion, I guess, more than a shift, for a company like John Deere, but not one that's surprising, I think.
Yeah, it's not surprising. Actually, what is surprising is that they already aren't, more so. So, I mean, they have been involved in things like getting tech into their equipment, but not so much in the sort of data side of things to get that in there. But there are initiatives that have already been working on that for a number of years. So interesting that they weren't already as much as I would have thought. So,
well, last year they introduced basically an autonomous tractor that's GPS guided for large scale farming. And if you've never had the opportunity to travel to the western part of the United States, to the the Kansas and the Nebraskas and those areas where they do large scale farming, I mean, these are largely done by mostly autonomous automated machinery.
Well, it's moving that way. It's not.
It's even now it's not autonomous, but it is. It's you go out and check it every 10 hours to make sure it didn't mess anything up or anything. I mean, it's amazing to me how much it's doing that. So it does make a lot of sense for this stuff to be more satellite based and controlled even more so. The tricky bit here, of course, is that, I tongue in cheek called them the software licensing company because they have moved to certain business practices that are closer to renting as opposed to owning, which is a very different change for a lot of farmers in the United States, at least. And this has led to some real big issues with developmental concerns as John Deere has been. They use the phrase in here, the agribusiness, which is, for some reason, till I read it for this news article, I never thought of John Deere, as big as they are, as agribusiness as opposed to a tractor company. And there's no reason for me to have never thought that. That's really what they're involved in. And now they're moving, into space to do this. So that I think it's a long way of me saying I totally get where you're coming from, Sue. It feels like this should have been going on for a lot longer than it really has.
For me, it goes to I have some posters from NASA, and the poster for satellites has a John Deere tractor in a field, and it shows all the connections that are going on. So when I saw this article, it made me think immediately to that poster that they're using and giving out to schools to educate people about, the role of satellites in agriculture worldwide.
Yeah, because I think the growing thing, right, even more so than the location, is the mention of AI. And, as we do more automated analysis, I mean, you can see how that would feed into. So not just can you have your location, but also your AI is feeding in the moisture content, perhaps of your crops that you've gotten from a remote sensing analysis, and is adjusting what you're doing to the crops in terms of those type of things too. So that is really just an area that still is fairly new and in its infancy. And so I think that there's, that's the part that I'm like, wow, there's really so much there. I mean, it's a little scary, some parts of it, but yeah, so I just, maybe it's just been behind the scenes and that only now is it coming out, but.
Well, one of the interesting things this week, because of course, you see a lot of different things coming out of companies around CES, and this is kind of one of those, even though I think this was announced a little bit earlier. This was about the same time that John Deere said, we're all in on right to repair. So yeah, if you have some radical of our stuff, you can repair it all you want to, and you can keep it as long as you want to. But that goes in tandem with, but we don't really expect you to be buying our stuff anymore because we're essentially going to move to a services industry, like Frank was saying. So it's just kind of an interesting, yeah, we're going to let you repair all the stuff that you have, but.
This will resonate with Sue. The analog that makes me think of this is IBM, right? I mean, IBM used to make a thing, a typewriter, and then it made a computer, and then you bought a thing. It came with some software, maybe bought some more software, but then they realized there's no money in buying a thing. Who wants to bother with that? Software as service. That's where the money is at, and that's essentially what John Deere's doing. Is that this tractor that had been around since the 19th century? Who cares? We're not doing that junk anymore. We're selling software as a service, like every other, Oracle and Esri and any other company you want to name. And that's pretty radical. And you're right. It was a very big shock for John Deere to go, yeah, we don't care if you have a right to repair, because they were one of the strongest, more powerful advocates against right to repair in the United States.
So this was news that came out, and again, another one that made someone here think of Sue, which was artificial intelligence is being used by the researcher at California State University, along with Google, to track with artificial intelligence, remote sensing, and a combination of that and fieldwork to track beavers and beaver dams, which are incredibly hard to trace, whether in the field or using imagery. So now they have modeled a way to get high resolution data quicker and more reliably. This is important because beavers play a very big part in the ecosystem. They have a lot of parts to play in the health of the environment, and they're impacted by things that are going on, such as the increasing amount of wildfires. So it's just very interesting. And I think probably the most exciting part is they chose the name EAGER, as in eager beaver, as the acronym for.
So I want to know what it was about Sue. I want to know that connection.
Animal stories. She likes and
a while back I told a beaver story.
Like I did.
Okay.
Yeah. A while back I told a beaver story. So yeah. And I have to say on that note, right, beavers, as noted in this article also, right, people who live in areas that have beaver populations, many of the time has been the time that the beaver's been maligned, right? Because their engineering ability, which is noted in this article, is actually pretty amazing. But if you've ever had one dam up, for example, an area that might have a culvert that goes under a road, or maybe some agricultural fields that are nearby, sometimes your frustration will come out against the beaver. But they are actually a really important part of local ecosystems, and it's amazing what they can build in their little beaver ponds and stuff. And they're relentless, by the way. They are never say die. It's always they're tryhards, and they do well. But it's interesting to note that it actually is difficult to identify, if you're doing kind of a regional study, identify beaver ponds and landscapes very easily without actually going on the ground.
I thought it was significant for other areas, considering they say they decreased the time needed to map by 80%.
Yeah, and that's it. And this is a particular type of feature that really was labor intensive to kind of understand. You had to see it because, again, it's hard to kind of pick it out from other types of ponding and other things.
I don't have a link for it, but there's a YouTube video I was watching this last week that talked about there's a part of, I think it's in Canada, where only one human being has ever seen the beaver dams that go on in the wilds there, because they're so remote and so difficult to get to, and they know they're having a huge impact on the aquifers and the watersheds. But this is the type of system that's critical for understanding that, because it's just too difficult to get out there and check it out.
Yeah, I will say it's cool if you've seen them. So when I worked on the Army base up in upstate New York, there were some that we would just come upon them doing our surveys out in the wilds. And, they were like the classic ones with the lodge in the center and stuff. And it is amazing how it transforms that micro landscape, though. It really is. And with just, in some cases, just a few trees damming it up. I mean, it is an amazing thing, but it can be frustrating too, when they interact with rural landscapes and sometimes flood things.
Next up in news, there's some pushback by a few senators over the FCC's new broadband map that they've just rolled out back in November. I think it was mid-November. Two senators from Nevada have specifically submitted letters of complaint, and I think at least one, if not both, from Vermont are also complaining about essentially inaccuracies in the broadband map. And I thought this was a really interesting geospatial problem. I think this is a geospatial data problem. Essentially, what's going on is that prior to this new map from the FCC, the way they would map broadband is based upon census block. So if a provider said, yeah, we have broadband in that census block, they just assumed everybody in the census block had broadband, which is just crazy. It's just not true, particularly whenever you live in rural areas like where we live. Well, at least where Barbara and I live, it's just not something that's true. So the census came down and they said, no, you're going to have to do this now based upon address and do this at basically point level data, which on the surface, as a geospatial person, most of us should go, yeah, that makes the most sense. But it turns out they're getting a lot of it wrong. And I don't know, and this article doesn't necessarily delve into it far enough to figure it out, whether this is a problem with reporting by the broadband providers themselves, which may be a source of data error. I bet there's an address matching data error as well. And I think that may be causing some of the problems here. So this is kind of an interesting specific use case of geospatial that I think is actually teasing into some broader infrastructure questions.
Well, we also have the fact there that it's not a static data set. They had addresses from X date that they're matching against, but how many more houses have been built since then, how many miles of fiber have been laid since then, and things like that are question marks into this data set. So it's as much a temporal resolution as it is a spatial resolution issue as well. And
it's a self-reporting kind of thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, that as we've talked about this particular data set multiple times in the past, relying on those people being monitored to report their own data is not in the best interest of the consumer.
And by the way, for those of you geographers out there, the term for the mistake that was made, assuming that just because one address in a census block had data that was relevant for all others, is what is known as the ecological fallacy. Right, where you assume that Yes.
We could throw in the one that Frank's about to say
Yes,
as well.
as well.
Yeah, I would argue it's a modifiable unit problem as well.
Correct, as well. So there you go. A real-world example of both of those very important geographic concepts, which have a huge impact on geospatial data. I'm about to talk about that in one of my classes.
And on top of this is what is exacerbating this problem and why the senators are getting involved in this very issue is that they released this map out in, again, I think mid-November-ish timeframe. And by January 13th, which means that by the time you're listening to this, that date has passed, that states had to give feedback. And this is very important for the billions of dollars in broadband modernization that has gone into law now. And to apply for these grants, it's based upon this data. So these data errors have real billions of dollars implications for these communities that want to expand their broadband, not just the people that live in those areas, not to minimize that, but the senators were essentially saying, we need more time because your maps kind of suck. And I think there's a valid point, but specifically because we're talking about the holidays and how many people are really looking into it and all that stuff like that. Don't know how that'll be resolved. It's not a news article necessarily, but it is a very interesting geospatial data problem, I think.
One which has implications for infrastructure, which is increasingly crucial to geospatial as a whole.
See, this is where you get a company and, just because this is a company that does this stuff, I'm going to use them. But you go to speedtest.net and you tell them, okay, we'll work with this government agency in this state to set up a server. And then everybody who knows to do it, and that's, of course, a whole other set of issues, they can go and ping that server, which would provide your address, your IP address at least, and your provider and the speed. So that would be a way for them to record the data to use for ground truthing. Yeah, you see the whole thing there. Okay, never mind.
I'm imagining a whole week where they set aside to do this, Jesse, and I think that would be really effective because I was thinking this is also revealing a lot more issues than I think they were planning for it to reveal. That a lot of times you pull that thread and you're looking at, issues we talked about, the ecological fallacy and stuff like that also need to be addressed that are coming out, trying to do something this large.
Next up, and this is kind of a small article, but I think interesting. So another FCC announcement that they are actually doing a bit of a reorganization. And so they are getting ready to launch their own space bureau. And so while this will largely probably have more impact on things like communication satellites, but it's another recognition of how fast the satellite and with it the remote sensing industry, so both communications and remote sensing, but how it is just growing at such a fast pace and regulation is not keeping up because there really aren't enough people and procedures and frameworks to actually help for that. So the FCC is actually going to reorganize into a Space Bureau and an Office of International Affairs that are coming out of the original International Bureau. And so that focus on a Space Bureau, I think, is the thing I just wanted to mention and think about again how we're trying to catch up with what technology is already letting us do in the satellite space and just try to get a handle on some of those things.
And of course, that doesn't even go into the other agencies from Space Force to NASA to others that have jurisdictional statements, regulatory responsibility over space topics in the U.S., which doesn't even get into the international aspects of it.
Yeah, dealing with space debris is one of the things that they're charged with in the Space Bureau. And that's a big problem.
Along with everything we've been talking about comes data and the large amount of data and the geoethics of using data and our privacy. And this goes back to a company launched in 2017 by Berners-Lee, who is credited with creating the idea of the internet, and his company Inrupt, which has created this idea of pods so that you have more control over your data. And this is an update. They have launched these experimental services through the UK's National Health Service and in the Belgian region of Flanders to give citizens more control over their own personal data and to see how this is going to work, this different idea of data management, that you can have more control over it. What's interesting is that it has connections to some of the companies that when we're talking about the main content for today, with consulting firms like Ernst & Young.
Yeah, this is called a space pod, and it's basically a hard drive on the internet, but not on the internet. It's a weird thing. I think I get it. I get the need for it. It's I'm not sure pod would be what I would go with locker. That makes more sense to me as a sort of analogy. But I was reading this article and I was thinking, yeah, like hard drives used to be, just where you stored your stuff. I mean, it's just the difference is it's secure and nobody can get at it. And this is kind of interesting. And I also feel like a lot of things are attempting to do this at some level. It's just a matter of coming up with a set of protocols and standards that are non-government regulated, which is the tricky bit.
There's that. And we can point to things like the recent LastPass hack. There we go. That just kind of highlights that anytime we have something in the internet and it's got a centralized way of getting access to it, that there's potentially issues. And so that's kind of why making these disconnected so that there's not a central way into them has been the argument to make such a thing. Yeah,
I think though that there are many, many difficulties. I mean, I see the reasoning behind it, but beyond a certain few pieces of information that you could independently hold in a pod, a lot of data that you create on the internet is specifically created in your interaction with apps that you have no control over. There's only so much that something like this could do, because the idea of the pod holding it, right, and hence sending out these pieces from behind its safe walls, only what you want. But once you make that connection, any data created that is value added to it, right, is still going to belong to whatever application that you're sending it to. So short of being able to hold an application also inside your pod and do it there, right? So I think that it's getting along the road to recognizing that, we want data to emanate from us, not data be created because we sidle up and get into an application and then, that starts everything. But I think it'd be really hard to really have that be adopted and be as much of a protection as would be hoped.
And we can point to, a lot of the recent controversy over Apple's changes in their ads policy and other iOS policies that allow users to say, no, don't let this other app track me while I'm in this app because it has nothing to do with what I'm doing in here. And, Facebook/Meta argued that had a huge impact on their income for the year.
Yes, because the internet at the end of the day is still ads. It is driven. The billions and billions of trillions probably of dollars go down to that original model of clicking on ads, right, in some form or another. And so it's crazy to think that, but that really is the business model.
So here's my soapbox, though. So either stop that or make it better. It drives me insane that I get ads for stuff that have no relationship to me or no interest. Why can't I go on record as saying, if you're advertising something with sports, I'm not interested in it at all, period, ever, at any level. And everyone like what they like. That's just not a thing I like. Yet I still get these ads for things like that. And I'm just like, I would willfully put that out there in the universe. If you're showing me an ad for, a sports package on whatever streaming, whatever, I'm never going to buy it ever.
That's right. Future AI who's going to go back and listen to all our podcasts to know what we do.
Yes. And then I'll add in, that if you interrupt one of my videos that I'm really enjoying with your ad, I'm definitely not going to buy your stuff ever.
Well, I understand the philosophy of exposure, right? So the idea is that if I expose you to something 7,000 times for a cleaner or whatever, and you go buy a bottle cleaner, you'll go, oh, I've seen that, and not necessarily understand the positive and negative interactions. But there are things that I think you can fairly say, there are things that I'm not going to need or not going to want or not relevant to me. That's just a genre that doesn't do it. If you show me raisins as many times as you ever want to show me raisins, I'm never going to buy your raisins ever. I hate them. They're disgusting. I can't stand them. So, these are things that I think that I don't understand why in ads, if I can't control the information that finely, you're failing. Anyway, that's my soapbox.
Well, but for those who turn off the things, though, that let it grab that information about you, right, you're reinforcing it. So that's the funny part, too, is the things that you do for privacy mean you get ads that might not be relevant to you. So it's like catch-22.
You know, but here's the thing is that what I found is that the current ad algorithms don't seem to care.
Fair enough.
If there's enough of a check then from the Raisin Council or the NFL or whoever, then they'll go, yeah, I'm gonna show them the ad. And I'm like, this is a waste of everyone's time.
That's what I found interesting, because since 2017, and this is something else that Inrupt created, is Tim Berners-Lee still trying to, promote his vision for what the internet is for people, and trying to continue to try to bring it back to that vision of a community. And again, I think there's a lot of challenges, but it's really interesting to see it's still ongoing.
Continuing on with data, there's two quick things I just wanted to touch on, and I don't think there'll be much conversation around them. One, currently the OSM has released the results of a data model study that they ran, and people can go take a look at it and provide comments if they want to get involved with any thoughts and changes to the future OSM model.
I just want to interject with telling people to use OSM more.
Yeah.
Well, I would say I'm surprised too, along with others, that OSM does not already have an area data type. I just think I ever noticed that, because I always just look at the linear data anyway. So, well, there you go.
I mean, that's kind of what it was built for at the beginning, was points and lines.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's all I've ever used. So, fair enough.
It's kind of like when Esri announces, well, we've got all these new raster tools. You're like, you didn't have the raster tools before? Huh. Yeah, it's just like, I learned something new.
Yeah.
The other bit is that the Linux Foundation projects is behind and has released the Overture Maps Foundation. Now, Overture Maps Foundation is looking to create kind of a single format way of presenting map data so that developers will more easily be able to build services and maps and apps around maps, which of course are, we're in the industry. We know how many bizarre formats there are and how few of them we actually use, and can kind of get behind the idea of, having a single approach to data modeling would be good. But keep in mind, we just talked about OpenStreetMap, which is largely doing a lot of that as well. And so apparently they subsequently, after Overture Maps was announced, replied via a blog post, we'd be happy to work with you guys. So it's just kind of
it's like, what?
why does the computing, industry feel that it must go through and recreate everything for itself once again, instead of working with other computer scientists who are already working on these problems?
Let me bring out soapbox 2. And there's a perennial problem within software development that nobody ever had the smart thought that I just had. That seems to be the basic assumption. And it's a little frustrating. It's pretty impressive how, as a developer, you can sit down and just make something, which is really amazing. It is truly amazing. I don't need a PhD to go invent a thing. I can just invent it using the technology. That's really cool. The downside is that nobody has a damn lit review to figure out, hey, did somebody already figure this out already?
How many libraries are out there that I could just pull from GitHub on this specific thing?
Yeah, I mean, and it's not like Esri doesn't have a data model that's just out there that you could do what they're doing here. I mean, they're not on the list of Overture's groups, and I noticed that 1/4 of the big founding members, or two, arguably half the big founding members, are Esri competitors. So, and have been in the past. It's a little baffling. I agree that okay,
I
this
like
is cool.
TomTom sneaking in there.
Yeah, this is cool. Don't get me wrong, but people have been doing this.
Yeah, and again, supportive of the idea. Curious to see how it moves forward. Just it like any of these, because it's not like this is the only one either.
Well, that's why I'd like to see. So why Overture? I thought, let's say, well, they're going to tell us what's missing in all of the others and why. But no, they just.
Well, they're going to create a global entity reference system.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure there's already one of those. There's more than one of those, right?
Really? Sure, yeah. I don't know. I mean, but I don't see anything in here about choosing a single projection, which
entities from different data sets to the same real world entities. It's called a GIS. Oh my God.
And the bottom of it says, join this open map data project to ensure that Overture supports the features and use cases you care about. Okay, go look at the software that's already doing that. That's what we care about. I mean, it's a little, I agree with you. It's great that an amazing body of development and experience is attacking these problems, because I don't think we've solved all of them.
Oh no,
but build, not replicate. Come on.
And also, how long is this going to take to get working?
Yeah, and if you are building, say what you're building that's not already there. I mean, that was the thing I was waiting to look at when I first saw this, but it wasn't there.
Yeah, and here's the thing. To be in a steering membership, it starts at $3 million. You have to have at least 20 engineers on your staff, and at that point, you get a seat on the steering committee. Everybody else can give us money, including $300,000 for a general membership, $3,000 for a contributor, but they don't even get to have anything to say on the steering committee.
Metaverse framework, anyone?
Yeah.
Which is a little weird considering it's a Linux Foundation thing, right? Because one of the big powerful things about Linux is that, sure, we have a Linux, but you can just go out there and take a code base and go, this tool has never worked exactly how I think it ought to work. I'm going to change it. And then you can publish it and people go, that's a way better way to do that tool than it used to exist. We're going to start using it. And that's kind of the philosophy there, right? But to have this economic gatekeeping between you and actually being able to do that is a little weird for this philosophical base in theory.
Well, and to be fair, I'm not entirely familiar with the Linux Foundation projects. So
that's true.
That's different than the original GNU license, and then the forked. How many different licenses are there now for Linux? I don't even know.
Nobody does.
Yeah. So again, curious to see what comes of.
Create an easy to use ecosystem of map data. For who? Like easy for who? Like end users, developers? What are you talking about?
How clearly it's not currently easy. So what is not easy currently that you're trying to address?
What's wrong with a WMS call? Is that too hard? What's too hard about it?
I'm still going to slide in. I'm still going to slide in my metaverse word.
Which one?
That I think that perhaps there's something that they're thinking about there in terms of where the framework will be applied.
But there's City GML and other places that are addressing that.
But they wouldn't be this one. And if you have people who want to be big players in that world deciding it's going to be this one, then if you want to play in their space, I'm just saying.
Quality assurance. I mean, there's some stuff in there they do identify that I think is interesting, like map errors, breakage, and vandalism in the data. I'm like, well, that is actually kind of interesting, because something like OSM, you can go in and edit things. There's a QC process. I'm not saying anybody can change anything, but that's been a perennial problem with user community driven product, is the making sure that nobody's just saying, well, this line goes to this person's house because I don't like the guy, type of stuff, and verifying that. So automating that would be really cool, but also there are QC processes in place. So I don't know they're going to add how much. I'm not sure where they're going to make it better.
I think that brings up a question for me of, does this say that that the data set is going to be open, or it's just going to be easily usable? Because I don't think I don't
remember seeing the word open.
Open map data.
Interoperable? Yeah, okay, fair enough.
But interoperable doesn't mean that it's open as an OpenStreetMap. So I don't know. We'll see.
As if it's going to be open as an OpenStreetMap.
Aims to incorporate map data from multiple sources, including open data sources, but that's not the same thing as making your product open.
It doesn't make those data sets open just because you included them.
Right. And unless there's some sort of license that drives that. But that's going to be highly dependent on, for example, if you take data from the West Virginia GIS Technical Center, that's open data, but you can charge for it. We can't stop you. It's a really good question. Is it going to be open? This is a very interesting thing that I simultaneously think is cool and I hope succeeds, but I really want to know at what.
Next generation map products. That's what I was going to succeed at.
How many generations do we have to go to be as far next? At this point of next generation, shouldn't we be at like 97 generations removed?
We are, but every generation has the next. Okay, so we'll leave that. Oh wait, Sue wants to look at the relationship between Overture and OpenStreetMap.
Yeah, I saw that in the FAQ. Yeah.
It's intended to be complementary to OpenStreetMap.
And then the next one is how does it be licensed? The ODBL and CDLA permissive V2 license, which you'd have to go look and see what that means. Because as you said, there's a bazillion licenses.
So there's an open database license now?
Apparently? I mean,
yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does.
The code, however, will be open source and subject to MIT license. So
I just feel like I'd just like to know more. I will reference my favorite Better Off Ted TV show, if you ever heard of that, and the Jabberwocky Project, and I will look at the folder and go, is there a page missing? Because I just feel like, again, it could be really cool, and it may be, but it just feel like, again, that I just want to know more about what they feel that they're addressing in terms of missing.
Apparently, not insignificant number of our questions will be answered in the next 6 months because the first data sets will be released in the first half of 2023. So hopefully we'll be able to revisit this entire thing in the next 6 months or so. It doesn't say when the code's going to be released. It just says it's going to be on GitHub, but we can, and this wouldn't be a terrible, if anyone knows anyone at the Linux Foundation engaged in this, reach out to us. We'd like to do an interview. That'd be cool.
Reach out to one of the other people, because I've been terrible about actually following up with the interviews, even though we probably have like 3 or 4 interviews that I started to set up and then never finished. So email one of the other 3, because Jesse sucks at it right now. If, of course, you would like to find out more about events, here we go.
GeoNight, the International Night of Geography, an event similar to Geography Awareness Week or GIS Day, has a call for, it's hosted by the Association of Geographical Societies in Europe and the International Geographical Union, and everything is set to take place April 14th, 2023.
2023 Digital Construction Week is taking place May 17th and 18th in London, UK.
The International Federation of Surveyors, FIG Working Week 2023, is going to be taking place May 28th through June 1st in Orlando, Florida.
If you'd like your event added to the podcast, send us an email to podcast@veryspatial.com. I am better at that than following up on interviews.
If you'd like to reach us individually, I can be reached at sue@veryspatial.com.
I'm barb@veryspatial.com.
And you can reach me at frank@veryspatial.com or follow me on all the social medias at NoJoePar.
I'm available at Kinda Spatial, and of course, if you'd like to find any of our contact information, someday I will update it over at veryspatial.com/contact. I did update the page design finally after 4 years of being annoyed by it.
As always,
We're the folks from VerySpatial.
Thanks for listening.
And we'll see you in a couple weeks.